The security briefing had been going smoothly until Commander Vex'thal made the announcement that would, in retrospect, become the most quoted phrase in Galactic Military Academy history. Cadets, you'll be paired with Terran handlers for this cycle's tactical training exercises. They'll be bringing their companions. Lieutenant Krezon, a decorated Rexian officer with 17 standard years of service, raised one of her 4 manipulator appendages. Sir, when you say companions, do you mean the Earth canines, the ones they call dogs? Vex'thal's carapace shifted in what might have been amusement, or indigestion. With Zalarians, it was genuinely difficult to tell. Negative, Lieutenant. The Terrans have decided to introduce us to a different species from their planet. Something called... He consulted his data tablet, his optical sensors narrowing. A honey badger. The briefing room fell silent. Absolutely nobody knew what that was, which should have been everyone's first warning sign. When humans name something after food and another animal, things rarely end well for anyone involved. But military protocol demanded questions, and Ensign Torvik, fresh out of the academy and brimming with misplaced confidence, decided to be the one to ask them. Sir, is it similar to the Earth badgers that were documented in the preliminary xenobiology reports? The ones that burrow and are, quote, rather grumpy. According to the file, Ensign, the honey badger is, let me read this exactly, not actually closely related to regular badgers, weighs approximately 9 to 16 kilograms, and possesses what the Terrans describe as an attitude problem of legendary proportions. Krezon's tentacles twitched skeptically. 9 kilograms? Sir, that's barely larger than a standard ration pack. Surely this is some kind of Terran humor. The file also notes, Vex'thal continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone reading their own death warrant, that honey badgers have been observed fighting off lions, hyenas, and leopards. They've been documented breaking into military installations, and, this is a direct quote, they don't care. They don't care about what, sir? Torvik asked. Just don't care, in general, about anything. It's apparently their defining characteristic. The silence that followed was the kind that usually precedes either brilliant revelations or catastrophic mistakes. This was definitely the latter. 3 days later, the Terran delegation arrived at Station Kepra 7, and with them came Sergeant Marcus Webb, a human male with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen some things, done some things, and absolutely did not want to discuss any of those things. Next to him, on a reinforced lead that looked like it could tow a shuttlecraft, was approximately 12 kilograms of absolute chaos wrapped in gray and black fur. The honey badger's name was Gerald. Yes, Gerald. Not destroyer of worlds, not fang of terror, not even something vaguely intimidating like Spike or Ripper. Gerald. Which should have been the second warning sign, because humans only give normal names to things that are abnormal enough not to need impressive ones. This is Gerald, Sergeant Webb announced to the assembled alien officers, who were all maintaining what they believed to be a safe distance of approximately 4 meters. He's 3 years old, fully trained, and has been my partner for 18 months. Gerald, for his part, appeared to be conducting his own inspection of the alien delegation. His small black eyes moved from officer to officer with an intensity that suggested he was calculating exactly how much effort it would take to bite each one of them. The conclusion he seemed to reach was not much effort at all. Sergeant Webb, Commander Vex'thal ventured carefully. The briefing materials suggested that honey badgers are difficult to train. How did you manage to domesticate this creature? Webb's expression suggested that the commander had just asked how he'd managed to domesticate a tactical nuclear warhead. Sir, with respect, Gerald isn't domesticated. Gerald is cooperative. There's a significant difference, which is, domestication implies we change the animal to suit our needs. Cooperation implies we reached an understanding. Gerald does what I ask because he's decided it's interesting, not because he's programmed to obey. If he gets bored or disagrees with the plan, well, Webb shrugged with the casual acceptance of a man who'd clearly lived through several of Gerald's disagreements. We adapt. Krizan, who prided herself on her xenobiological knowledge, studied the small creature with her primary optical sensors. Gerald was, objectively speaking, not particularly impressive. He had a stocky build, short, powerful legs, and a distinctive white stripe running from his head down his back. He looked, if she was being entirely honest, somewhat adorable in a compact, fuzzy sort of way. This was the third warning sign that everyone missed. "Permission to approach and scan the creature, sir," Krizan asked. "Standard xenobiological protocols require documented bio-readings for all non-sentient species aboard the station." Webb and Gerald exchanged a look. Actually exchanged a look, as if the honey badger was genuinely considering the request and formulating an opinion about it. Then Gerald made a sound that could only be described as a grunt, which Webb apparently interpreted as consent. "Gerald says that's fine, but keep the scanner at least half a meter away. He doesn't like things near his face." Krizan approached slowly. Scanner extended, maintaining the requested distance. Gerald watched her with those unsettling black eyes, utterly still except for the tip of his tail, which twitched once. Just once. The scanner beeped, collecting data on bone density, muscle composition, and neurological activity, and the readings made Krizan's manipulator appendages freeze mid-motion. "Sir," she said slowly, not taking her sensors off Gerald, "these readings can't be correct." "What's wrong, Lieutenant?" Vex'thal moved closer, his own curiosity piqued. "According to this scanner, Gerald has bone density comparable to tungsten composite, muscle fiber density 3 times what should be possible for a mammal his size, and pain receptors that appear to be significantly reduced in sensitivity." "That's correct," Webb confirmed cheerfully. "Honey badgers have incredibly tough skin, too. About 6 millimeters thick and very loose, so if something grabs them, they can twist around and bite while still being held. It's a whole thing." Ensign Torvik, who had been silent until now, made a gurgling sound that his species produced when confused. But why would evolution produce such a creature? What possible environmental pressure would create an animal that's simultaneously adorable and apparently indestructible? "Earth," Webb replied, as if that explained everything, which, to be fair, it kind of did. Gerald's ancestors evolved in Africa, where basically everything wants to eat you, sting you, or stomp you flat. So they evolved to be too angry and too tough for anything to bother trying. And Terrans decided to train these as military companions. Vex'thal's carapace shifted again. Definitely concern this time. Not military, exactly. Gerald's technically a specialized detection and clearance animal. Honey badgers have an exceptional sense of smell, they're absolutely fearless, and they can get into spaces most other animals can't. Plus, Webb reached down and scratched Gerald behind the ears, which produced a sound remarkably similar to a purr. If purrs could convey mild disdain, they're surprisingly affectionate once they decide they like you. The training exercises were scheduled to begin the following morning in Simulation Bay 12, a massive facility designed to replicate various combat environments. The scenario was straightforward in theory. Find and neutralize mock explosive devices hidden in a replicated urban environment, while hostile forces, represented by training drones, attempted to prevent success. Krizan had been paired with Sergeant Webb and Gerald, which she'd initially considered fortunate. After all, she was an experienced officer with extensive tactical training. How difficult could it be to coordinate with one human and his compact, fuzzy companion? This was warning sign number 4. And by now, the pattern should have been clear. They entered the simulation zone at 0600 hours, and the environment materialized around them. Buildings rising from hard light projections, complete with rubble, abandoned vehicles, and the distant sound of simulated weapons fire. Webb knelt down and had what appeared to be a legitimate conversation with Gerald, All right, buddy. Standard search pattern. We're looking for the spicy packages. If you find something, mark it and return. If the flying annoyers, show up, do your thing, but try not to break them this time. We got complaints last week. Gerald made a huffing sound that somehow conveyed acknowledgement, mild offense at being told what to do, and absolute certainty that he would break things if he felt like it. Then he vanished into the rubble like smoke, moving with a speed and silence that made Krizan's combat sensors struggle to track him. He just left? She asked, uncertain if this was standard procedure. He's working. Gerald takes this stuff seriously. Well, as seriously as Gerald takes anything that isn't food or napping. How do we maintain tactical coordination if he's operating independently? Webb tapped the side of his helmet, indicating the neural link standard for human military operations. I've got a tracker on him, and Gerald knows the mission parameters. Plus, honey badgers have excellent spatial memory. He won't get lost. The first explosive device was located within 6 minutes. Gerald simply appeared from beneath a collapsed wall section, made a specific chirping sound, and then disappeared again before either Webb or Krizan could respond. The device was exactly where Gerald had indicated, hidden in a drainage pipe. How did he know? Krizan wondered aloud as Webb carefully disabled the training charge. Smell. Honey badgers can detect scents at concentrations we'd need laboratory equipment to register. Plus, Gerald's done this about 200 times. He's got a pattern for searching structures. The second device was found 4 minutes later. The third after another 3 minutes. Gerald was working through the simulation zone with methodical efficiency, and Krizan found herself simply following Webb as they collected and neutralized each target. It was almost boring, which should have been warning sign number 5. Then the drones arrived. They came in fast, 6 training units designed to simulate hostile air support, firing paint markers instead of actual ammunition, but programmed to register hits that would, in a real combat situation, be lethal. Standard protocol called for seeking cover and coordinating suppressing fire while calling for support. Gerald had different ideas about protocol. The first drone swooped low, targeting sensors locked on Webb's position, and Gerald launched himself from the top of a debris pile like a furry missile. He hit the drone mid-flight, claws extended, and rode it straight into the ground where it impacted with a spectacular crunch. Lights on the drone flickered and died. Gerald, completely unharmed, was already bounding toward the second drone. "Webb," Krizan said urgently, "your companion is engaging military hardware." "Yeah, he does that. Should we stop him?" "Can't. Gerald's in work mode. Besides, watch this." The second drone had apparently learned from its fallen comrade's mistake and was maintaining altitude. Gerald studied it for perhaps half a second, then did something that made Krizan's tactical training scream in protest. He climbed. Not up a building or a convenient pile of rubble, but up a vertical wall, using what appeared to be pure spite and determination, his claws finding purchase in gaps barely visible to her optical sensors. At the top, he launched himself horizontally through the air, caught the drone with one paw, and dragged it down while simultaneously shredding its rotor assembly with his teeth. They hit the ground together. Gerald got up. The drone did not. 4 drones remained, and they'd apparently updated their threat assessment protocols because they were now maintaining maximum altitude and coordinating their fire patterns. Smart, professional, tactically sound. Gerald looked up at them, made a sound that could only be described as derisive, and then did something that would be talked about in after-action reports for years to come. He waited until one drone descended slightly to improve its firing angle. Then he threw a rock at it. Not a pebble. A rock the size of a human fist, which Gerald somehow picked up, aimed, and hurled with enough velocity that it struck the drone's sensor pod dead center. The drone wobbled, attempted to compensate, failed, and crashed into its wingman. Both plummeted earthward in a tangle of metal and profanity producing sparks. Did Gerald just... Krizan couldn't finish the sentence. Yep, honey badgers are tool users. Gerald figured out projectile combat about 6 months ago. Command is still trying to decide if they should discourage it or give him a medal. The final two drones, perhaps sensing that their odds were not improving, attempted to withdraw. Gerald, whose attitude toward retreat apparently ranged somewhere between contemptuous and insulting, pursued them through the simulation zone at a pace that shouldn't have been possible for legs that short. He cornered them near the exercise boundary, climbed another wall, and dispatched both with what could only be called ruthless efficiency. Then he trotted back to Webb, sat down, and made an expectant chirping sound. "Good work, buddy." Webb produced what looked like a dried sausage from his pack. Gerald accepted it with the grace of a feudal lord accepting tribute from a peasant, then promptly devoured it in 3 bites. The exercise concluded 18 minutes later when Gerald located the final explosive device hidden in what the simulation designers had clearly thought was an impossible location, inside a sealed container suspended 3 meters off the ground. Gerald simply climbed up, ripped the container open with his claws, marked the device, and climbed back down. "Lieutenant Grezon," Commander Vex'thal's voice crackled over the comm system. "Please report to the observation deck for debriefing." The observation deck overlooked the simulation bay and currently contained approximately 30 officers from various species, all wearing expressions that ranged from stunned to horrified. Commander Vex'thal's carapace was definitely displaying concern now, possibly mixed with something like respect. "Lieutenant, in your professional opinion, what are we dealing with here?" Grezon considered her words carefully. "Sir, Gerald is highly effective. Extremely effective, possibly too effective." "Elaborate." "The honey badger displayed tactical awareness, problem-solving capabilities, and combat effectiveness that significantly exceed mission parameters. He also demonstrated complete disregard for his own safety, conventional tactical doctrine, and what I can only describe as the laws of physics as I understand them." One of the observers, a Korthian captain named Velmis, gestured with his primary appendage. "The creature destroyed 6 combat drones designed to simulate atmospheric superiority fighters, 6, in under 4 minutes, using improvised tactics that aren't in any tactical manual written by any species in the Galactic Council." "To be fair," Webb interjected from where he stood near the viewport, Gerald sitting calmly at his feet, "those were training drones. Real military hardware would be much harder for him to—" He paused, glanced down at Gerald, who was looking up at him with an expression that somehow conveyed extreme skepticism. "Actually, no. Gerald would probably figure it out. Never mind." "This is insane," Ensign Torvik muttered. "A creature that small shouldn't be able to do what we just witnessed." "Size is relative, Ensign," Webb replied. "Gerald weighs 12 kilograms. But pound for pound, he's one of the toughest animals on Earth. You want to know the really interesting part? There's more." Vex'thal sounded resigned. "Gerald's being gentle. This is his professional behavior. If he actually perceived a threat to me, his responses would be significantly more aggressive." The silence that followed was profound. "More aggressive than destroying 6 drones and terrifying 30 galactic military officers?" Grezon asked weakly. "Oh yeah, way more aggressive." And that was when the alarm went off. Station Kepra 7 was designed to support up to 5,000 personnel and had security protocols that had been tested, refined, and implemented by the best military engineers in the Galactic Council. Those protocols included multiple redundancies, fail-safes, and early warning systems for everything from hull breaches to biological contamination. None of those protocols had been designed with the possibility that a maintenance hatch would be forced open from the outside by something small, determined, and utterly uninterested in following proper station access procedures. The alarm indicated a breach in section Gamma 12, which was storage and contained nothing particularly vital. Just supplies, spare parts, and a few containers of various materials waiting for redistribution. Security teams were dispatched immediately, following standard containment procedures. What they found would require significant updates to those procedures. The hatch, which required specialized tools and authorization codes to open properly, had been torn open, not cut with precision equipment, not bypassed with technical expertise, but torn. The metal bent and warped as if something had simply decided that the hatch was more of a suggestion than a barrier. Inside, moving through the storage containers with purposeful intent, was what the security team's scanners initially classified as an unknown xenobiological threat. It was small, covered in fur, and was currently in the process of opening sealed containers with its claws and teeth, apparently searching for something. The security team leader, a Vrexian named Torgax, with 8 years of experience, activated his comm. "Command, we have an unidentified creature in Section Gamma 12, requesting immediate backup and xenobiological containment. Describe the creature, Torgax. Small, mammalian, approximately 8 to 10 kilograms, gray and white coloring, very sharp claws. Sir, it just opened a container sealed with titanium composite, with its teeth." There was a pause on the command channel then. "Is the creature displaying aggressive behavior toward personnel?" "Negative, sir. It appears to be searching for something. But, sir, it's between us and the only exit. If we try to pass, there could be an incident." Another pause, longer this time. Then a different voice came on the channel, one that made Torgax's spine straighten reflexively. "Security team, this is Sergeant Webb. Can you describe the white marking on the creature? Does it run from the head down the back?" "Affirmative, Sergeant. Do you know what this thing is?" "That's Gretchen. She's Gerald's mate. And before you ask, yes, female honey badgers are generally more aggressive than males. Don't make any sudden moves. Don't try to corner her. And whatever you do, don't get between her and whatever she's looking for." "Sergeant, how did another honey badger get aboard this station?" "That's an excellent question that I'm going to need to discuss with some logistics personnel. Gretchen was supposed to be secured in a habitat on Transport Ship 7. Was? Torgax didn't like the past tense in that sentence. Honey badgers are excellent at escaping containment. It's literally what they do for fun. I'm on my way to Gamma 12 now. Whatever you do, don't try to capture or tranquilize her. She'll take it personally." The security team maintained their position, weapons lowered but ready, watching as Gretchen continued her methodical search of the storage area. She was, if anything, even more efficient than Gerald, moving through containers and supplies with clear purpose. Then she found what she was looking for. The container was labeled as containing preserved food items from Earth, part of a supply shipment for the human delegation. Gretchen opened it, the seals yielding to her claws like they were made of paper, and extracted what appeared to be a large jar of something dark and sticky. Honey. Of course it was honey. She sat down, cradled the jar between her paws, and proceeded to open it with a combination of biting, twisting, and what looked like pure determination. The jar, designed to maintain atmospheric seal in space, opened. Gretchen began eating honey directly from the container with what could only be described as blissful satisfaction. That was when Webb arrived, Gerald trotting at his side. The sergeant took one look at the scene, the destroyed hatch, the open containers, the security team, and his mate, covered in honey, and sighed with the resignation of a man who'd known this day would come eventually. "Gretchen," he said, his tone carrying both affection and exasperation. "You couldn't wait until I fed you your ration?" Gretchen looked up from her honey, her face sticky and her expression utterly unrepentant. She made a sound that could only be interpreted as, "I was hungry, and I knew there was honey here, so I got it myself." "Problem?" Gerald waddled over to his mate, sniffed the honey jar, and then looked up at Webb with an expression that clearly communicated, "I would also like some honey, please, and maybe reconsider your security protocols for food storage." Webb pulled out a second jar, smaller, from his pack, and offered it to Gerald, who accepted it with considerably more grace than Gretchen had shown. Then the sergeant looked at the security team, at Commander Vex'thal, who had just arrived, and at the torn hatch. "In my defense," he began, "the containment facility was rated for Earth predators up to 90 kilograms. Nobody mentioned that honey badgers don't care about weight ratings." "Sergeant Webb," Vex'thal's voice was carefully controlled, "how many honey badgers did you bring to this station?" "Just 2, sir. Gerald and Gretchen. They're a bonded pair, which actually makes them more stable and easier to work with. Easier. Vex'thal repeated the word as if testing its meaning. One of your companions just tore through a secured hatch, bypassed security measures designed by the finest engineers in 3 sectors, and is now eating contraband in a restricted storage area. To be fair, sir, the honey's not contraband. It's part of our authorized supply allotment. Gretchen just figured out where it was stored and decided to help herself. How did she even know where it was? Webb scratched the back of his head. Honey badgers can smell honey from kilometers away, sir. It's literally in their name. Putting the supply shipment on the same station where we're conducting training exercises was probably an oversight. Krezon, who had followed Webb to the breach site, studied Gretchen with her scanner. The readings were nearly identical to Gerald's: high bone density, exceptional muscle composition, reduced pain sensitivity. But there was something else: a slightly elevated metabolic rate, and what appeared to be increased aggression markers in her neural chemistry. Sergeant, you mentioned female. Honey badgers are more aggressive. How much more aggressive? Put it this way, Lieutenant. Gerald will assess a situation and decide if something's worth fighting. Gretchen will assess a situation and decide if something's worth not fighting. The answer is usually no. As if to demonstrate this principle, one of the security drones activated its scanning beam, attempting to catalog the damage to the hatch. The beam passed near Gretchen, who immediately dropped her honey jar, spun toward the drone, and made a sound that every species present instinctively recognized as a threat display. The drone, following its programming, attempted to complete its scan. This was a mistake. Gretchen launched herself at the drone with speed that made Gerald's earlier performance look leisurely. She hit it mid-hover, bore it to the ground, and began systematically dismantling it with her claws and teeth. The drone's armored casing, designed to withstand small arms fire and environmental hazards, lasted approximately 8 seconds. "Gretchen, no!" Webb shouted. "Bad girl, we talked about this. Drones are friends, not targets." Gretchen paused, looked at Webb, looked at the destroyed drone, and then made a sound that somehow conveyed, "It pointed a thing at me." I responded appropriately. Then she returned to her honey jar, as if nothing had happened. Gerald, still working on his own jar of honey, glanced at the destroyed drone, and then at his mate, with an expression that suggested both pride and mild concern that she might be setting a bad example. "Commander," Torgax ventured carefully, "permission to update security protocols regarding Earth mammals." "Granted," Vex'thal said immediately. "Include classifications for anything Terrans describe as having an attitude problem. Also, Lieutenant Krezon, I'm reassigning you." "Sir?" "You're now the official liaison for xenobiological integration. Your first task is to develop protocols for managing creatures that don't care about our protocols. Your second task is to figure out how to explain this to the Galactic Council without causing a panic." Krezon's tentacles drooped. "Sir, with respect, I'm not sure that second task is possible." "Neither am I, Lieutenant. Neither am I." The rest of the day was spent reinforcing hatches, updating security measures, and having what Webb described as a serious talk with Gretchen about station property and appropriate behavior. Gretchen, for her part, seemed to listen attentively while continuing to groom honey from her fur, which gave the distinct impression that she was acknowledging the conversation while reserving the right to ignore it completely if something interesting came up. That evening, in the human delegation's quarters, Webb sat down with both Gerald and Gretchen for what was clearly a regular routine. He checked them for injuries, the scans showing nothing despite their activities, cleaned their claws, and discussed the day's events as if they were fellow soldiers, rather than animals. "All right, team, I know today was exciting, but we need to talk about operational security. Gerald, destroying training drones is acceptable during exercises, but we need to work on your restraint protocols. Gretchen, breaking into storage areas is not acceptable, even if you can smell honey. We've talked about this." Both honey badgers looked at him with expressions that clearly communicated understanding, while simultaneously suggesting that understanding and compliance were 2 entirely different concepts. "I know you're both very capable. That's why you're here. But these aliens, they're not used to working with animals like you. They think in terms of rules and protocols and logical behavior. They don't understand that you're basically small, furry embodiments of chaos who happen to be very good at your jobs. Gerald made a chirping sound. Yes, I know you prefer creative problem solver to embodiment of chaos. Fine, but my point stands. We're here to show them what humans and their companions can do working together. That means demonstrating teamwork, reliability, and professionalism. Gretchen huffed. Yes, you were very professional about acquiring that honey. The hatch might disagree, but I acknowledge your efficiency. Just maybe ask next time. Both honey badgers exchanged a look that Webb had learned to interpret over the past 18 months. It was the look that said, "We make no promises, but we'll consider your request." Webb sighed, scratched them both behind the ears, and pulled up his mission reports. There were forms to fill out, incident reports to file, and a very apologetic message to send to the logistics coordinator who'd approved storing honey on a station with honey badgers. Meanwhile, in the station's command center, Vex'thal was having a conversation with the Galactic Council's Xenobiological Integration Committee via quantum comlink. "Let me make sure I understand correctly, Commander." The committee chair, a dignified queller named Ixzan, said slowly. The Terrans brought 2 small mammals to participate in training exercises. These mammals proceeded to destroy military training equipment, breach secure storage facilities, and demonstrate combat capabilities that significantly exceed their physical parameters. That's correct, Chair Ixzan. And your assessment is that these creatures, these honey badgers, are suitable for integration into joint military operations? Vex'thal considered his response carefully. Chair Ixzan, my assessment is that these honey badgers are terrifyingly effective at their designated tasks. Whether that makes them suitable is above my authority to determine. What I can say is that Sergeant Webb maintains absolute control over their actions. They respond to his commands, and their capabilities, while unconventional, are undeniable. Unconventional, Ixzan repeated. Commander, according to your report, one of these creatures threw a rock at a military drone. An accurate throw, Chair. Very accurate. That's not particularly comforting. No, Chair, it's not. There was silence on the comlink, the kind that suggested multiple committee members were reviewing files, consulting with advisors, and generally trying to process information that didn't fit any existing classification framework. Commander Vex'thal, we're going to need extensive documentation on these honey badgers, full behavioral profiles, capability assessments, and integration protocols. Can you provide those? I can provide what we've observed, Chair. As for behavior predictions, well, I'm not sure that's possible. These creatures seem to operate on principles that defy conventional analysis. That's also not particularly comforting, Commander. No, Chair. Welcome to working with Terrans and their companions. The comlink ended, and Vex'thal settled back in his command chair, his carapace displaying what might have been amusement, or possibly resignation. Tomorrow would bring more training exercises, more opportunities for Gerald and Gretchen to demonstrate their unique approach to problem solving, and more chances for the Galactic Council to realize that Earth's most dangerous export might not be its weapons technology or its military tactics. It might just be its small, furry, utterly fearless mammals who really, genuinely, absolutely did not care what anyone thought was impossible. Morning briefings at Station Kepra 7 had become significantly more interesting since the honey badgers arrived. Commander Vex'thal stood before the assembled officers, a new datapad in his manipulator appendages. This one labeled in bright red text with Honey Badger Protocols, Revision 7. Cadets and officers, today's exercise will test combined species coordination in hostile territory extraction. You'll be working in teams of 4, 2 aliens, 1 human, and 1 honey badger. The objective is to locate and extract a high-value target from a simulated enemy compound while avoiding detection. Ensign Torvik raised his appendage nervously. Sir, just to clarify, we're supposed to avoid detection while working with creatures that destroyed 6 drones yesterday and ripped through a security hatch? Correct, Ensign. This exercise specifically tests the honey badger's ability to operate with stealth when required. Sergeant Webb assures me they're fully capable of quiet operations. From the back of the briefing room, Webb nodded. Gerald and Gretchen can be incredibly stealthy when they want to be. The key phrase there being when they want to be. That's not reassuring, Sergeant, Lieutenant Curzon muttered. It's not meant to be, Lieutenant. It's meant to be accurate. The teams were divided up, and Curzon found herself once again paired with Webb, this time with Gerald as their designated companion. Gretchen would be working with a team led by Captain Velmis, the Corthian officer who'd watched yesterday's drone destruction with increasing horror. The simulation zone materialized into a nighttime urban environment, complete with patrol patterns, sensor grids, and guard towers. The target was located in a central structure, 3 stories tall, with multiple entry points and overlapping security coverage. On paper, it was a challenging but manageable scenario designed for advanced tactical students. On paper didn't account for honey badgers having opinions about tactical planning. Webb knelt down next to Gerald in their starting position, 200 meters from the target compound. All right, buddy, this one's about stealth. We need to get in quiet, grab the package, and get out without triggering alarms. Think you can manage that? Gerald looked at the compound, then at Webb, then back at the compound. His expression clearly communicated, I can be stealthy. Whether I will be stealthy depends entirely on whether anything annoys me. Good enough. Standard insertion, you lead on point detection, I'll handle technical barriers. Lieutenant Curzon provides overwatch. Simple extraction, in and out, nobody knows we were there. They moved toward the compound using available cover, and Curzon had to admit that Gerald was indeed capable of stealth. The honey badger moved like liquid shadow, his low profile and dark coloring making him nearly invisible in the simulated darkness. He navigated around sensor beams with casual ease, his movements precise and economical. The first barrier was a fence, 3 meters tall, topped with sensor wire. Standard protocol would involve cutting through or finding an access point. Gerald simply dug under it, creating a tunnel in approximately 90 seconds that was large enough for all 3 team members to crawl through. That's actually impressive, Curzon whispered as they emerged on the other side. Honey badgers are exceptional diggers, Webb replied quietly. In the wild, they excavate burrows that can extend for meters underground. A chain-link fence is basically a suggestion. They reached the compound wall, and Gerald paused, his nose working the air. Then he made a soft chirping sound and pointed with his snout toward a ventilation grate near ground level. Webb examined it with his scanner. Air filtration system leads directly into the lower levels. Good eye, Gerald. Or good nose, technically. The grate was secured with bolts that required specialized tools to remove. Gerald looked at the bolts, looked at Webb, and made a sound that somehow conveyed, "You're kidding, right? Please don't just rip it off. We're trying to be stealthy." Gerald huffed but waited while Webb carefully removed the bolts using proper equipment. The honey badger watched with what appeared to be impatience, as if the 45 seconds required for this task was an unforgivable delay. The ventilation shaft was narrow, barely large enough for Gerald to squeeze through comfortably. For Webb and Curzon, it would be a tight fit. Gerald entered first, moving through the darkness with confidence, and the other 2 followed, their progress considerably less graceful. Meanwhile, on the other side of the compound, Captain Velmis was discovering that Gretchen had very different ideas about stealth operations. Sergeant Webb said she could be stealthy, Velmis hissed into his comm as Gretchen calmly walked directly through a sensor beam, triggering an alarm that she then ignored completely. She can be, Webb's voice crackled back. When she feels like it. What happened? She walked through a sensor grid. Did she destroy anything? Well, no, but the alarm. Is she moving toward the objective? Velmis checked his tactical display. Gretchen was indeed moving purposefully toward the compound's east entrance, completely unconcerned with the simulated guards converging on her position. Yes, but there are hostiles incoming. Then I'd suggest you keep up, Captain. Gretchen's not big on waiting for backup when she's decided on a course of action. What followed would be analyzed in tactical training courses for the next decade, usually under the heading, When Operational Plans Meet Operational Reality. Gretchen reached the east entrance, where two simulated guards stood at attention. The proper approach would involve neutralization from a distance, technical bypass of the door lock, and careful timing to avoid detection. Gretchen's approach involved walking directly up to the guards, who tracked her with their weapons, confused about whether a small animal constituted a threat. Their confusion ended when Gretchen jumped, grabbed the first guard's weapon, twisted it with surprising strength, and used it to strike the second guard. Both went down in a tangle of limbs and paint markers. Gretchen then proceeded to the door, studied the lock for approximately 2 seconds, and simply tore the access panel off the wall, exposing the manual override. How did she know where the manual override was? One of Velmus's team members asked in amazement. I don't think she did, Velmus replied slowly. I think she just assumed there would be one and decided to find it the direct way. Inside the compound, Gerald had led his team through the ventilation system to a junction point directly above the target's holding area. Webb carefully removed a vent cover, and they dropped silently into a corridor. 3 doors led off in different directions, and no obvious indicators showed which contained their objective. Gerald sniffed the air, walked directly to the middle door, and scratched at it once. You're sure? Webb asked. Gerald gave him a look that communicated, I can smell the synthetic materials they used to create the dummy target from here. Yes, I'm sure. Webb checked the door, found it locked with a basic electronic system, and began working on the bypass. This took approximately 3 minutes, during which Gerald sat patiently, occasionally glancing back the way they'd come as if listening for pursuit. The door opened, revealing their objective, a simulation dummy with a tracking beacon. Webb grabbed it, and they began their extraction, retracing their path through the ventilation system. So far, their insertion had been perfect. No alarms, no detection, textbook stealth operation. That was when Gretchen's approach created complications. The alarms she'd triggered had sent simulated guards throughout the compound on high alert, including several who were now positioned directly in the path of Gerald's planned extraction route. Webb paused at a vent junction, watching through the grating as guards moved through the corridor below. We're stuck, Krizan whispered. If we drop down now, they'll spot us immediately. Gerald studied the situation, then looked at Webb and made a questioning sound. No, Gerald, we're not doing the loud option. We're committed to stealth, so we find another way out. Gerald's expression suggested he had opinions about this decision, but he turned around in the cramped ventilation shaft and began leading them in a different direction. The alternative route took them higher into the building's upper levels, further from their extraction point, but away from the concentrated guard presence. They emerged into what appeared to be an office area, dark and empty in the simulation's night cycle. Gerald immediately moved to a window and looked out, calculating distances with what appeared to be genuine geometric reasoning. Gerald, buddy, we're 3 stories up. We're not jumping. Gerald made a sound that clearly communicated, speak for yourself. I could totally jump. You could survive the jump. We couldn't. Different option, please. The honey badger huffed but began searching the room, and after a moment, he found what he was looking for, an access ladder leading to the roof. They climbed up and emerged into the simulated night air, the compound spread below them. From this vantage point, they could see Gretchen's team making their own extraction. She'd apparently decided that since stealth was compromised, efficiency was the next best option. Her team was fighting their way out through the front entrance, with Gretchen leading the charge against simulated defenders who were learning very quickly that paint markers don't stop determined honey badgers. Is that Gretchen? Krizan asked, watching the chaos below. Yep, that's definitely Gretchen's style. When Plan A fails, Plan B is apparently organized mayhem. And we're doing the quiet option, because we weren't detected. So our insertion method is still valid. Gerald's got the right idea. We extract from above and avoid the ground level entirely. The roof had an emergency transport pad, a feature of the simulation designed for aerial extraction scenarios. Webb activated the beacon, and within 2 minutes, a simulated transport arrived. They boarded with their objective, completing the mission without triggering a single alarm. Below them, Gretchen's team was also boarding their transport, having fought through approximately 15 simulated guards. Both teams had successfully extracted their targets, but with dramatically different approaches. The debrief was enlightening. So, Commander Vex'thal began, studying the tactical recordings. We have 2 successful missions with identical objectives but completely opposite execution methods. Team 1, led by Lieutenant Krezan with Gerald, achieved total stealth. 0 alarms, 0 engagements, perfect insertion and extraction. Team 2, led by Captain Velmis with Gretchen, triggered every alarm in the compound but still successfully extracted their target through overwhelming tactical aggression. Sir, Velmis interjected carefully, I want to note that the overwhelming tactical aggression was largely Gretchen's initiative. My team adapted to her approach rather than the other way around. Noted, Captain. Sergeant Webb, why did the 2 honey badgers employ such radically different tactics? Webb considered his answer. Sir, Gerald and Gretchen have different personalities and preferred operational styles. Gerald tends to be methodical. He'll choose the efficient path that involves the least effort for the maximum result. Gretchen is more direct. She assesses situations quickly and commits to an approach fully. So one is stealthy and one is aggressive? Ensign Torvik asked. No, Ensign. Both can be stealthy and both can be aggressive. Gerald chose stealth because it suited the situation and his assessment was that we could complete the mission without engagement. Gretchen triggered an alarm, probably accidentally, and then decided that since stealth was compromised, speed and aggression were more efficient than trying to re-establish covert status. She adapted to changing circumstances, Krezan said thoughtfully. Exactly. Honey badgers are incredibly adaptive. They don't have rigid operational doctrines. They assess, they act, and they adjust based on results. Vex'thal's carapace shifted in what might have been understanding. So what you're telling me, Sergeant, is that these creatures demonstrate tactical flexibility that most trained soldiers spend years developing. More or less, sir. Evolution gave them excellent problem-solving abilities because their survival depended on it. We just pointed those abilities at military objectives. The second week of training exercises brought new challenges and new revelations about honey badger capabilities. The cadets and officers of Station Kepra 7 were learning to work with Gerald and Gretchen, and in the process discovering that human and honey badger partnerships operated on principles that didn't quite fit standard military frameworks. During a search and rescue simulation, Gerald demonstrated an ability to track specific scent signatures through complex environments that put dedicated scanning equipment to shame. He located 3 hidden targets in a collapsed structure scenario in under 10 minutes, navigating through spaces too small or unstable for larger team members. Gretchen, meanwhile, proved during a defensive position exercise that she took the concept of perimeter security very personally. When simulated hostile forces attempted to breach the team's position, she met them with such ferocious determination that the exercise coordinator had to recalibrate the difficulty settings twice because the attackers kept getting eliminated too quickly. This is absurd, the coordinator, a Tellurian named Kixven, complained to Vex'thal. The simulation is designed for teams to hold for 15 minutes against overwhelming odds. Gretchen's team has been holding for 47 minutes, and she's personally neutralized 32 attackers. Is she working with her team? Vex'thal asked. Oh yes, very cooperatively. She's positioned herself at the primary breach point, and every time hostiles try to push through, she pushes back. Aggressively. The team behind her barely has to fire their weapons. Then I'd say she's doing her job exceptionally well. Sir, the honey badger has turned a desperate defensive scenario into an impenetrable fortress by simply refusing to let anything past her position. Vex'thal made a notation on his datapad. Add that to the capability assessment. Honey badgers excel at denial of terrain when properly motivated. It wasn't all tactical success and impressive demonstrations. There were incidents, moments that reminded everyone that honey badgers, for all their effectiveness, were still semi-wild animals with their own priorities and limited patience for things they found irritating. During a technical briefing on explosive ordnance disposal, Gerald fell asleep. Not from boredom, Webb explained, but because honey badgers in the wild often sleep up to 18 hours a day, and Gerald had decided the briefing was an acceptable nap time. He woke up immediately when the practical demonstration began and performed flawlessly, but the image of a honey badger snoring softly while a colonel explained detonation timing became legendary. Gretchen, during a diplomatic simulation meant to teach interspecies negotiation, decided that one of the simulated hostile negotiators was being unnecessarily aggressive toward Webb. She expressed her disapproval by climbing onto the table and positioning herself between Webb and the holographic projection, growling steadily until the scenario was paused. Webb had to explain that honey badgers were extremely protective of their bonded humans, and that Gretchen would need reassurance that the aggressive behavior was simulated and not a real threat. "How do you reassure a honey badger?" the simulation operator asked. "Very carefully," Webb replied, "and usually with snacks." But the most significant incident occurred during what was supposed to be a routine equipment inspection. The station's quartermaster, a fastidious queller named HFY, had implemented a new inventory system that required biometric scans of all equipment and personnel. This included, according to regulations, any animals assigned to military personnel. Webb had brought both Gerald and Gretchen for their scheduled scans, explaining the process carefully. Gerald tolerated the scanning with patient resignation, standing still while the sensors mapped his biometric data. Gretchen, however, had different feelings about being scanned by unfamiliar equipment operated by someone who wasn't Webb. The first scan attempt resulted in Gretchen simply walking away from the scanning platform. The second attempt, after Webb coaxed her back, resulted in her batting at the scanning arm with one paw. The third attempt resulted in her grabbing the scanning arm and attempting to pull it off its mounting. "Sergeant Webb," HFY said with barely controlled frustration, "station regulations require biometric data on all assigned animals. Can you please control your companion?" "I'm trying, sir. Gretchen just doesn't like unfamiliar equipment near her face. It's a trust issue. Perhaps if you explain to her that it's necessary for—" "Sir, with respect, Gretchen understands it's necessary. She just doesn't care. Those are two separate things for honey badgers." They eventually completed the scan by having Webb hold the scanning device while HFY operated it remotely, and Gretchen tolerated this only because Webb was involved. The entire process took 40 minutes instead of the scheduled 5, and HFY updated the regulations to note that honey badger biometric scanning required specialized protocols and significant patience. As the training cycle progressed, something unexpected began happening. The alien officers and cadets weren't just learning to work with Gerald and Gretchen, they were genuinely bonding with them. Krizan started carrying dried fruit in her equipment pack because she'd learned Gerald had a weakness for apples. Captain Velmus, despite his initial horror at Gretchen's methods, developed a respectful working relationship with her built on mutual understanding that sometimes the direct approach was best. Even Commander Vex'thal, who maintained professional distance from most personnel, was observed having what appeared to be actual conversations with Gerald during observation sessions. The honey badger would sit near the commander's station, occasionally chirping, and Vex'thal would respond as if the exchange was perfectly logical. "You talk to Gerald now?" Lieutenant Krizan asked one day, finding the commander and honey badger apparently discussing tactical displays. "Gerald has insights," Vex'thal replied without embarrassment. "He sees patterns we miss because he's not constrained by doctrine. Yesterday, he pointed out a flaw in our perimeter setup that 3 senior officers had overlooked. He pointed it out. He walked over to the display, put his paw on a specific section, and made a sound. When I examined that area more closely, I realized it was vulnerable to exactly the kind of infiltration approach he would use. So yes, Lieutenant, I talked to Gerald. He's proven to be a valuable consultant." The final exercise of the training cycle was the most ambitious, a 72-hour field operation in the station's wilderness simulation zone. Teams would be inserted into a complex environment that included multiple terrain types, variable weather, hostile forces, and objectives that would test every skill they developed. Webb, Gerald, Gretchen, Grezon, Velmus, and 4 other team members were assigned to locate and secure 3 objectives spread across 50 square kilometers of simulated wilderness. They would have limited resupply, no external support, and conditions designed to push them to their operational limits. "This is the real test," Vex'thal announced during the final briefing. "Not of your combat skills or your technical abilities, but of your capacity to function as integrated units under sustained pressure. The honey badgers are not tools or weapons. They're team members with unique capabilities and their own decision-making processes. Your success will depend on recognizing this and adapting accordingly." The exercise began at dawn, and the team inserted via drop pod into the northern sector of the simulation zone. The environment materialized around them, dense forest with rough terrain, and immediately Gerald and Gretchen began working. They ranged ahead of the main team, moving through the undergrowth with practiced ease, their senses alert for threats or objectives. Within an hour, Gerald had located the first objective, a supply cache hidden beneath a fallen tree. He marked it with a specific chirp pattern, waited for the team to catch up, and then continued forward. The first night tested everyone's endurance. The simulation's weather system generated a storm with heavy rain and dropping temperatures. The team established a shelter, using their combined expertise to create something that would protect them from the elements. Gerald and Gretchen burrowed into the center of the group, their body heat contributing to the collective warmth, and their presence somehow making the miserable conditions more bearable. "I never thought I'd be grateful for Honey Badger Company," Velmus muttered, his carapace pulled tight against the cold. "They're good at surviving harsh conditions," Webb replied, checking his companions for any signs of distress and finding none. "In the wild, they deal with everything from desert heat to mountain cold. This is actually pretty mild for them." The second day brought hostile encounters. Simulated enemy forces had been programmed to patrol the area, and engagement was inevitable. The team used Gerald and Gretchen as advanced scouts, their ability to move undetected providing crucial intelligence on enemy positions. When actual combat occurred, the honey badgers' role became clear. They weren't frontline fighters meant to absorb, damage, or hold positions. They were disruptors, fast-moving threats that created chaos in enemy formations and provided openings for the main team to exploit. Gretchen would charge into a position from an unexpected angle, forcing enemies to divide their attention. Gerald would flank, removing sentries or disabling equipment. It was effective in ways that traditional tactics weren't, precisely because it was so unexpected. The simulation's AI had to constantly adapt, trying to counter opponents that didn't follow any predictable pattern. By the third day, the team had located all 3 objectives and was moving towards the extraction point. They were exhausted, low on supplies, and covered in mud and simulated battle damage. But they were working together with a cohesion that transcended species or training backgrounds. When they reached the extraction zone, they found it occupied by a significant hostile force, apparently the simulation's final challenge. Standard doctrine would call for requesting alternate extraction or attempting to bypass the enemy position. The team had neither the resources nor the time for either option. Webb looked at his team, at the tired but determined faces of aliens who'd spent 3 weeks learning to trust humans and honey badgers. Then he looked at Gerald and Gretchen, both of whom were assessing the situation with their usual calculating intensity. "All right, team, here's what we're going to do. This is going to sound crazy, and it completely violates about 15 tactical protocols, but I think it'll work. We're going to use a strategy that Gerald and Gretchen have perfected over millions of years of evolution." "Which is?" Grezon asked. "We're going to convince that enemy force that attacking us would be way more trouble than it's worth. Gerald, Gretchen, you two are on demonstration duty. Everyone else, we're providing dramatic support. When they see what they're actually facing, they'll either withdraw or commit fully. Either way, we'll know what we're dealing with." What followed was later described in the official after-action report as Unconventional demonstration of force through coordinated intimidation display. The unofficial version involved 2 honey badgers charging directly at a dug-in enemy position while making sounds that the simulation's audio processors struggled to classify as anything other than pure aggressive intent. Webb and the team provided supporting fire, but the real impact came from Gerald and Gretchen simply refusing to stop advancing despite simulated weapons fire that should have forced them to take cover. The enemy AI, faced with opponents that didn't respond to suppressing fire and seemed to be accelerating toward rather than away from danger, made a calculation that any intelligent force would make when confronting something that defied expected behavioral patterns. It withdrew. The extraction zone was secured, and the team boarded their transport to the sound of 2 honey badgers making triumphant chirping sounds, while the rest of the team sat in stunned silence. "Did we just win?" Velmus asked slowly. "By essentially having Gerald and Gretchen convince a simulated enemy force that we were all insane." "Technically," Webb replied, "we won by demonstrating that we had assets who don't care about overwhelming odds, and that made us unpredictable enough to not be worth engaging. It's a valid psychological warfare tactic." "That's the most honey badger explanation of a tactical victory I've ever heard," Krizan said, and then she started laughing. The laughter spread through the team, the release of 3 days of tension and the absurd reality of what they'd just accomplished. The final debrief took place in front of the assembled station personnel. Commander Vex'thal presented the after-action analysis, complete with tactical breakdowns, performance metrics, and lessons learned. Then he did something unprecedented. He invited Gerald and Gretchen to the front of the room. The 2 honey badgers sat on the briefing platform, looking somewhat confused about why they were being displayed but willing to tolerate it. Vex'thal gestured to them with his manipulator appendages. These 2 creatures represent something that the Galactic Council's military doctrines have not adequately addressed. Not every species approaches problems the same way. Not every effective solution follows established protocols. Gerald and Gretchen have demonstrated that sometimes the best tactical asset is one that doesn't know it's supposed to be impossible for them to succeed. He paused, his carapace displaying what everyone had learned to recognize as amusement. "I have compiled my recommendations for the Council. They include updated integration protocols, revised training methodologies, and a strong suggestion that any future operations involving Earth animals be approached with equal parts respect and preparation. I have also recommended that Sergeant Webb receive a commendation for his work in developing human honey badger operational partnerships, and that Gerald and Gretchen receive official recognition as the first non-sentient aliens to be granted honorary military consultant status." The room erupted in applause, various species producing their equivalent of approving sounds. Gerald and Gretchen looked around, clearly uncertain what all the noise was about. Then Webb produced 2 jars of honey from his pack, and suddenly everything made sense to them. They accepted their honorary status with the grace of individuals who were mostly interested in the snacks that came with recognition. Later that evening, as the station prepared for the Terran delegation's departure, Krizan found Webb and his companions in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "Sergeant, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Lieutenant. When you first started working with Gerald and Gretchen, did you know they'd be this effective, this transformative for how we think about interspecies cooperation?" Webb was quiet for a moment, scratching Gerald behind the ears while Gretchen dozed against his leg. "Honestly, Lieutenant, I just knew they were remarkable animals who deserved a chance to show what they could do. Everything else, the tactical applications, the partnerships, the way they've changed how your people think about Earth species, that emerged from just letting them be themselves and trusting that their natural abilities had value. We've learned a lot from you, from all 3 of you, and we've learned from you. Gerald and Gretchen are better operators because they've worked with professionals who took them seriously. That's what good partnerships do. They make everyone involved better than they were alone." Krizan extended one of her tentacles, and Webb shook it in the human gesture of respect. Gerald looked up, made an approving chirp, and then resumed his examination of the stars, as if contemplating what other impossible things might be waiting out there in the galaxy. As the transport ships departed Station Kepra 7 the next morning, carrying the Terran delegation and 2 honey badgers who'd fundamentally changed galactic military thinking, Commander Vex'thal stood in the command center and updated his personal log. Final note on the Terran honey badger integration program: initial assessment, potentially dangerous animals requiring careful management. Final assessment: exceptional partners who taught us that effectiveness isn't about size, strength, or following established doctrine. It's about adaptability, determination, and the absolute refusal to accept that something can't be done just because nobody's done it before. The Terrans call this attitude not caring. I prefer to call it operational excellence unconstrained by conventional limitations. Either way, I hope we see Gerald and Gretchen again, preferably as allies and not opponents, because I genuinely don't want to face them in actual combat. He closed the log and looked at the tactical manuals stacked on his desk, already being rewritten to incorporate lessons learned from 2 small Earth mammals. Somewhere in the galaxy, other species would read these manuals and think the accounts were exaggerated or impossible. They would be wrong, because honey badgers don't care about impossible. They just care about getting the job done, preferably with snacks involved, and absolutely on their own terms. And now, thanks to 3 weeks on Station Kepra 7, the entire Galactic Council knew it too.